You start this off.
You are. Welcome back, folks. This is the Justice Oversight Committee, continuing our work. It's on September 18th. This afternoon, we're going to be spending time on Raise the Age initiative. And also we're going to work with Ben in terms of going through the current law for earned time, because we're going to have to make a recommendation at our next meeting. So I think it would be very important for people to understand what earned time is within the Department of Corrections before we have to make a recommendation. So Raise the Age, we have a long list of folks who are here to testify. I'm going to turn this over to Representative Lalonde, Chair of the House Judiciary Committee. Both House and Senate Judiciary Committee have been working on this. Representative Lalonde, as well as Senator Sears, did a lot of work this past session on the current status of Raise the Age. So we're going to juggle a little bit in terms of the order in which people are going to testify. But we are going to start out with Eric to give us a brief summary of what Raise the Age is. So Martin, it's all yours.
Yeah,
I'm
great.
off the hook.
I'm expecting a lot of questions from you, Madam Chair.
I'll just kick you under the table.
So just, I know we have a lot of witnesses to get through, so I'm going to have it somewhat focused, more so for the other witnesses, but from Eric, we're going to hear kind of how did we get to the place where we are right now, just the legislation over the past few years. But then I will be asking, the next witnesses I will have up will be the folks from the Office of Child, Youth, and Family Advocate. What I'm mainly going to be asking witnesses to testify to is, why are we doing this? What is the benefit of Raise the Age, particularly for the next step that is due to happen on April 1st of 2025, raising the age of 18. And then also, what are the impediments? And when we talk to DCF, who will go after the child advocate, really understanding what is needed, be in the best position to implement this successfully as of April 1st. But we're going to start with some basic background. And over to you, Eric. Thank you for being here.
Yes, thank you, Representative Lalonde, and thank you to the committee. Eric Fitzpatrick with the Office of Legislative Counsel, here to talk for a few minutes with the committee, as Representative Lalonde indicated, just to bring everyone up to speed again on what the details of the Raise the Age initiative actually are, substantively speaking. I actually have a little handout that I did just so that you would have something to bring with you in case other witnesses are referring the history or to any of the details of it. So if you ever sort of need a little, as we say in the legal world, to have your recollection refreshed, you can turn to that little document.
Don't rely on our memories, is that what you're telling us?
I certainly can anymore. Yeah, I need to have a piece of paper. Exactly.
Yeah, okay.
So, so the quick history is that this Raise the Age initiative has been going on in Vermont really since 2018. So it's been 6 years now. The implementation date, the first implementation date wasn't until 2020. But the first legislation was actually passed, 6 years ago, 2018. It was Act 2001 of that year. And as you would guess from what the phrase Raise the Age suggests, the whole idea behind it is that it's an initiative to increase the age at which a young person who commits a criminal offense can be charged in the family division rather than in the criminal division of the Superior Court. Now, that makes a big difference as to where you end up if you're a young person, one criminal division or the other, because as sure the committee will recall, we've talked about this part before, the family division proceedings are confidential. They are not subject to being disclosed of the young person's name or to other proceedings related to what's going on with the young person. Whereas criminal division proceedings are public, so that information will all be public. If you're in the family division, you have a case plan from DCF, and you have a case plan worker who works with you, and that's an entirely different program than you would have if you were subject to the Department of Corrections, in which case you might be incarcerated. You would have an entirely different set of services. And also very important is that in the family division, if you're a young person who is going through, you don't have a criminal record at the end. That's what you would have if you're charged as an adult in the criminal division, there's a lot of collateral consequences that a criminal conviction can bring up, whether it's related to your ability to get student loans, your ability to get public housing, your ability to carry firearms, travel overseas. There are all kinds of implications out there. So it makes a huge difference as to whether or not that young person is charged in the family or the criminal divisions. And there are generally two factors that go into whether you end up in one place or the other. And the two factors are, what kind of offense is it? And how old are you? And it revolves around those two moving parts. Now, the raise the age part doesn't really deal with factor number one. It doesn't really address the type of offense. It deals with the second factor, which is how old is the young person when the offense is committed. But just to remind everybody, so that because this may come up, even though factor one isn't really a part of raise the age, which is the what offense did the young person commit? You may recall the phrase the Big 12. Hopefully that rings a bit of a bell. So remember the idea there. Yes, yeah, literally. I love that happens. Right. So at least what we had always referred to as the Big 12 were 12 offenses that have been categorized by the legislature to be of a more serious nature, so that if a person, at least a person 14 years of age or older, committed a Big 12 offense, they would always start the criminal division, or generally speaking, I should say, because there's another off ramp for the state's attorney to bring a youthful offender proceeding in the family division. But generally speaking, 14-year-old or older, you commit one of the Big 12 offenses, those offenses start in the criminal division. And I'm going to have to get used to saying a different number because we've always said Big 12, but just this past year, the legislature passed, I believe it was an Act 125, same one that you're about to look at as far as what this committee is supposed to be doing. It expanded that number to 14. It actually took one of the existing ones away, which was burglary into an occupied dwelling, and it added 3 new ones, which was, I think, aggravated stalking, drug trafficking, and
Committing a felony with a firearm.
thank you very much. Yes, committing an offense while using a felon or using a firearm, rather. Yeah. So those are added. That leaves you with a final total of 14 now. So I'll have to get used to saying Big 14, I suppose. But that's just for background knowledge. The Raise the Age initiative deals with the age factor. And so prior to the Raise the Age initiative going into effect in 2020, and as I say, the legislation was actually passed in 2018. Prior to that, the age cutoff was 17. So age 17 or younger. If a young person was age 17 or younger and they committed a non-Big 12 offense, right? Remember, because this doesn't deal with the Big 12 piece of that. So that means everything else, right? If it's not one of those 12 or now 14 listed offenses, any other offense, those offenses generally would start in the family division. So they would get all those benefits of confidentiality and PCF services and case plans, that sort of thing. So if it was 17 or younger, and that had always been the case prior to Raise the Age. Raise the Age passed in 2018, and then as of July 1st, 2020, step one, or you might call it phase one, step one of Raise the Age goes into effect. And on that date, July 1st, 2020, that higher age of 17 gets bumped up by 1 year to age 18. So at that point, going forward, if you committed a non-Big 12 offense, anyone 18 or younger would start in the family division instead of the criminal division. See that? So it brings in a whole nother universe of people who prior to that time would have started in criminal court, not family court. So that was phase one of Raise the Age, went into effect, as I say, July 1st, 2020. That same legislation that started Raise the Age, which was in 2018, Act 201, had a phase two, step two of the initiative. And that was meant to go into effect 2 years later, 2 years after that, not till July 1st, 2022. And at that time, the upper age limit would have been increased by 1 more year. So it would go from 18 to 19. They went from 17 to 18 in 2020. And then on July 1st, 2022, it would go from 18 to 19. So at that time, if you were 19 or younger and you had committed a non-Big 12 offense, your case would start in the family division instead of the criminal division, where it had always started prior to that. So that was the initial schedule for the implementation. However, if you may recall, between those years of 2020 and 2022, the height of the COVID pandemic. So what happened was that the legislature passed in 2022 Act 160, and that bumped out by 1 more year the implementation date of that phase two, that those 19-year-olds got delayed by 1 year to July 1st, 2023. And this is all, in case you're wondering, want to recollect this, it's on the first page, very bottom of the handout I passed out, kind of gives the proposed effective dates and how they changed over time. So that was the first time that the legislature extended that implementation date. The next year, in 2023, when that was phase two was supposed to go into effect, it was determined the resources still were not in place. So the implementation date was extended by 1 more year to July 1st, 2024, which would be a couple of months ago, right? That's when it would have got into effect. And that was the second time that the legislature decided to delay the implementation date. Then this past year, in the same act that I mentioned earlier, where the Big 12 was expanded by 3 offenses, the legislature again gave an additional extension, and this is the criteria that we want to go over in just a minute, are on the second page of the handout. So this was Act 125, which just passed this year, and extended the effective date. You know, it's interesting, as Representative Lalonde was mentioning earlier, this time not to July 1st of 2025, but to April 1st of 2025. That's a very significant difference because it leaves much less time for there to be any further extension of that date. And I think the members of this committee who were on that committee will talk about that, but so that was an intentional choice, and that's what you have in front of you now. So this next spring, April 2025, barring any further action by the legislature, that second step, that second phase of raise the age would go into effect, which means the 19-year-olds would then be going to the family division for non-Big 12 offenses. Now, in the meantime, we look at the legislative language that you see on page 2. In the meantime, Act 125 also said, all right, between this past July, a couple months ago, and next spring, when this phase 2 is supposed to go into effect, we want DCF to be bringing bi-monthly reports. Every other month, report to this committee, as well as a number of other legislative committees you see listed there. Every other month, starting on, and this is, if you look at sort of just a third of the way down the page, the very beginning of that underlined language, on or before the last day of every other month from July 2024 through March 2025. So reports should be coming to you folks about and let's go down a little bit further. What should the report be on? You see on its progress toward implementing the requirement of Section 7 to 11 of this Act that the Raise the Age initiative take effect on April 1st. So these are bi-monthly progress reports as to how they're doing about getting the initiative ready to be implemented and take effect next April 1st. So that sort of lays the groundwork for where you are now. And you'll see that the bi-monthly reports further down are very specific about some of the criteria that are supposed to be addressed. I can go over those if you want, or you can take a look at them on your own time, but just to note that they are quite detailed. What sorts of data the committee is looking to see to ensure that the groundwork is laid, essentially, that the foundation is ready for this phase 2 to take effect in April. Kind of the background, but happy to take any questions or
Any questions from the committee?
So just to be clear, right now, under raise the age, for those who are 18 years old or younger, if it's not a Big 12 or Big 14, it would start in family court.
Thank you. Yep, it's the current status.
Just to be clear, or the current status is.
And it goes to 19 on April 1st.
Right.
So, other questions? Yeah. go ahead.
Quick one, I'm somewhat familiar with this bill. Is there something in this bill that we're missing in reference to, okay, they're looking at April 1 of 2025 to raise the age to 19. Does it stop there, or are there small print in here which is going to continue to go upward and onward? Because why are we raising the age other than a criminal record? What point in time when do they become juveniles? Up to what age?
Well, I think,
Basis for this.
yeah, I think that it's statutorily, the legislature is sort of making that decision. And that decision is, at least in terms of non-Big 12 crimes, that you'll be treated as a juvenile at a little bit older age than you used to be. But to answer your first question, first of all, that's a policy choice for you. But there is no other step three, as it were, or there's no other thing after the age 19. Now, that's not to say that the legislature couldn't make that decision sometime in the future, but there isn't anything right now. That's the end of it.
Yeah, Tom.
Is there a reason why, this paragraph was put in the last paragraph? Failure to meet one or more of the progress reports are the elements. There's no reason to extend it. Is there a reason for that?
Yes.
Okay.
It's like, this is the last extension you're getting and we mean it. That's what the reason for that is.
Use one of these as an excuse not to do it.
That was exactly the thing.
Particularly establishing a secure residential, so.
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, there's a difference in submitting a progress report and actually achieving these things that are necessary in order to do it.
Right.
So you can't bail out.
It's not an easy bailout on this. So, all right, thank you, Eric. And I mentioned earlier, I don't think everybody's here, that we're going to skip around a little bit. And we're going to go to the director, Bernstein, and deputy, have you join us. And as I mentioned before, probably not going to, we don't really have time to go through your whole, the PowerPoint that was provided. And really want you to address two main issues, starting first of all with, why are we doing this? What are the benefits of Raise the Age, and particularly for the next step, raising it to 19? I know you have slides that you did include that address that, but if you could hit on that, and if you could address any impediments to getting there by April 1st that need to be dealt with. So that we're prepared on April 1st, 2025. So if you could introduce yourself to the record and then proceed.
Thank you. My name is Matthew Bernstein. I'm the Child, Youth, and Family Advocate for the state of Vermont. And with me is...
Hi, everyone. Lauren Higby, Deputy Advocate for the Office of Child, Youth, and Family Advocate.
Could you actually share this show anyway?
Share the
So
show.
share the show. I am going to put up our PowerPoint, but I understand the directive. So actually, would you, Representative Lalonde, you would like to know what the benefits are of Raise the Age and why we implemented it and what the impediments to implementation are? Is that correct?
Correct. Yes.
So Lauren's going to share our slideshow. Because I want to start with, we just hit F5. Okay. Our office exists sort of to answer these exact two questions. And I wanted to put this slide up because, when you talk about high level policy, systemic reforms, and when you talk about impediments to said policy, I think our office can bring quite a bit to the table. And that's why we're here. We want to continue to do that. And especially after hearing this morning's testimony, which was really eye-opening, it's clear that revenue is a key issue here. And I wanted to say that I think to answer, again, both of these questions that you posed, we have real opportunities to continue to draw down to expand our federal drawdowns. And, and I think that's what we should be focused on. Raise the Age. I think it's unquestionable that it's a good policy and that it should go into effect. And then I think we should turn to the really thorny question of how do we continue to fund these initiatives. And related to that, I want to again raise the prospect of the data system that DCF is about to implement, which is called CWIS. And without going down that rabbit hole, I just wanted to say, I would encourage this body to have, even though it feels like it's an internal procurement process at this point, I would urge this body to really push deeper into the data system inquiry. And I don't want to take up more time talking about that right now, but I think there are a lot of questions that are worth asking of DCF at this point, because crucial to expanding our federal drawdown and implementing Raise the Age is that data system. I think the short answer to your first question is there are some I'm going to skip all the way to the end. There are some really solid reports here. Those charts that we'll come back to are from some of them, but this is the last page of our show. And these sources, especially number 1 and number 4, are crucial to answering that question. I mean, there was the last source here, report on Act 201 implementation plan, report and recommendations from 2019, is one of the highest quality juvenile justice reports that exist for the state of Vermont. Karen Bastine worked on this at the state level. We had the Columbia Justice Lab. We had Vinnie Schiraldi, who is possibly the top national expert on these issues. And this report has both the background as to why Raise the Age, the national research as to why Raise the Age is successful and is successful, and also has a really detailed implementation plan, as the title said. So I think that is the best way to answer this question. I mean, I'll say in shorthand, national data, we don't have good data for Vermont, which is an issue, and it goes back to the data system. But nationally, there are a lot of studies that show that treating juveniles in a way that recognizes cutting-edge brain science reduces recidivism, among other things. It reduces recidivism and it keeps communities safer. So we don't come up here and proceed from the idea of kids should be in the community no matter what because they're kids, right? We proceed from the idea of the way to make everybody safer and also to preserve families and keep kids safe and recognize that children are children and their brains are not fully formed, is to have policies such as are included in Raise the Age. And there's a lot of data on that with people with PhDs that I'm not fully qualified to speak on, but that's, I think, basic answer to that question. And so we can, maybe we should go back to the beginning of our show just real quick. I'm not going to go through everything, but well, actually, let's go. Maybe we'll go fully backwards. So how do we know Raise the Age is working, right? This is some data from the Columbia Justice Lab report based on what was available to them publicly. This is not with any particular. This is no. I don't believe there's any freedom of information request behind this. And this chart shows, so there's 2 charts in our slideshow that are available in this full report, which is on that source page I just showed. So this is number of youth on probation as counted on 1 day each year. And essentially what this shows is that with the addition of 18-year-olds in 2021, as the orange bars represent, interestingly, the total number of youth on probation with DCF went down from at least the previous 2 years and was a little bit more than the previous 3 years than that. What's confusing about this is you'd expect if you're adding more juveniles in total, because you're adding 18-year-olds to caseloads in theory, you would expect to see some kind of an increase, right? Which was sort of incorporated into the planning. What's odd is that it went down altogether. Perhaps it was a pandemic issue. I don't know, but I think the takeaway from this slide is the inclusion of 18-year-olds on DCF probation loads did not overwhelm the system, right? And then the other graph here is, again, it's, correlation is not causation, right? We don't exactly know why this is the case, but this is number of youth in DCF custody as a result of delinquency. And you can see, I mean, a lot of this, the trends from 2009, you can see is the national trend in what I just said earlier about brain science, right? I wanted to also say, I meant to also say before that just because of the way systems work, courts are often behind where the science is. And, you see this across every area where, in society, the social norms change, even scientific studies show changes, and courts sort of take a while to catch up. You saw this with Brown versus Board of Education. You see this with, with many policies that eventually get litigated at the top court. But the law is really, you see this with, we used to have the death penalty for, a 14-year-old in this, in this country. And, that changed, but only gradually. So I just wanted to point out that what the court system says is not the same as what the current science is, and that's another point from that report. So I also wanted to clarify in terms of the data. So this slide shows you what we're really lacking, unfortunately, and I don't put this up here to vilify DCF in any way, But I do think that there's a real issue with this particular number that's cited. So this is on page 7 of the first progress report that Legislative Counsel Fitzpatrick was just talking about in that report. And here on this page, DCF says, as of June 3rd, 2024, there were 170 youth on probation who were not in DCF custody, which is the population we proposed would shift from DCF supervision to barge. And then you can read this for yourself. It's there's a lot between the lines here, but what to me this implies is that if raise the age goes through, you'll have 170 new youth that are going to barge. And that's not true. I mean, it's only implied, but if that's what this is trying to say, that's not true. We asked for an age breakdown of this population because what you'd want to know is how many 19-year-olds in theory might come on to caseloads, right? You'd be looking at the current adult numbers. And I just think this is sort of a symbol of this whole debate, which is in terms of the impediments to implementation. I honestly think a lot of it is sort of, it stirs up other issues with the department related to staffing, related to funding, and all of those things. Well, not all of them, but most of them we agree. We agree that DCF workers should have more support. We agree that DCF's budget should be raised. We agree that there should be more funding for barge. Yes to all of that, but that's not an impediment to implementation from our perspective. And I haven't seen any data from DCF that's relevant that shows directly that raise the age expanding to 19-year-olds is a true impediment. And what we know from national data, so we don't have really reliable state data. What we know from national data is that in places where, policies such as raise the age has been implemented, the recidivism rates went down and the violent incidents went down. And the stats show, and there's a quote that I think I took out of here in the interest of time, that showed that most juveniles, I think it actually says nearly all, this is a Columbia Justice Lab report, nearly all juveniles who commit a crime are able to successfully move on. It's the few that get in trouble repeatedly that are the issue, right? Absolutely. But when you're talking about a broad policy, if you recognize that most youth, once they're positively supported, can turn things around, that's crucial to our economic success. And, again, this morning, we don't want to put people in jail. And if we can avoid that, it's worth the money to avoid that.
Question, Tracy.
Sure. I just want to dig down a little bit on this statement in terms of the 10 to 21. I guess I happen to agree with you that it's not indicative of, to me, it's not indicative of what will move from DCF supervision to barge. I mean, theoretically, the 10 to 18-year-olds could already be doing that.
Right.
And of course, this bill doesn't cover 20 and 21-year-olds. So it's a much smaller, or I don't know, I can't tell you quantitatively of the 170, but it's a smaller subset of that 170. But I guess one of the things that I wanted to ask you about, because you referred to, this shouldn't be an impediment to implementation. In their budget testimony or information presented to our committee, DCF said that they require $600,000 for 6 new FTE family support workers and $925,000 for 9.25 FTEs increase in barge in order to implement the 19-year-old raise the age. Do you have any information that's contrary to that? Or, I think that, what you're saying in terms of sort of like the overall issues with caseloads and things like that at DCF. And we kind of saw this, I will say, in the Child Care Financial Assistance Program, where the administration tried to backfill things, tried to get more staff than were really necessary to implement CCFAP because they were already understaffed in significant areas. And we had to make a judgment about how many staff are really necessary to implement. But this is just data that DCF told us. What is your opinion about, that's $1.525 million.
Yeah, I think that's a great question for DCF. I think
I'll ask them too.
Okay, I think, I don't pretend to, know the exact numbers, but I do think that I do know there are a lot of vacancies now. And one thing that we've really focused on is with juvenile justice and child welfare is, helping DCF be a healthy and desirable place to work. And so, I think that to the extent that we are at the cutting edge of policy and that we are, I think that people go to work for DCF because they want to work with kids and help them be successful and not fall down the deep end of the juvenile justice system. So I think Raise the Age honors that. And I think like a holistic inquiry into your question is important, right? Like, again, I'm sorry, I know I'm a broken record, but the data system, if a DCF worker goes to work for DCF, whether there's a new position or in the current vacancies, and then the data system takes them an hour to enter anything, right? That's a problem. So I don't know if I'm not going to get up here and say they have all these vacancies and, and so therefore they don't deserve any more positions because.
I guess what I'm trying to get at is, I guess I was inferring from the previous statements that you made that DCF wouldn't necessarily need new resources in order to implement this. And I didn't want to infer something that wasn't accurate. So I
think we don't know.
It might not be this number or that number of positions, but do you believe that DCF either can do this within existing resources, or do you believe that additional resources would be necessary? Because I think that's an important thing, for us to have. And I expect that there would be differences of opinion between maybe what you would say, maybe what VSEA would say, maybe what the department would say.
Well, I think the problem is we're not looking at the relevant information in terms of data to make that decision.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's why I presented those things so far to sort of set the different parameters of what we do have. But, I think we could do better in terms of really directly relevant data because these conversations get smushed together.
Mm-hmm.
The facility gets smushed up and Raise the Age,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah.
The workforce issues get smushed up, and that's understandable. But I do think that really, if we're talking about Raise the Age in and of itself, we have to be really clear and really specific. And again, I would recommend bringing in the experts on that, including the folks who were on those previous reports. But I think Lauren also wanted to say something.
I think we're all asking really good questions, and I think DCF's doing their best to answer those questions with the data that they have. I think what we're missing is the caseload analysis of what 170 youth look like if they were to transfer to Barge. Also, what does Barge currently have? And what can they handle? And then look at best practice to see what is the best caseload amount for youth on probation and serving them in the family court, in the family system, and move from there. But I think I agree with Matthew in terms of the conversations getting mixed up together, because I did hear Eric say, the whole other universe of people, right? If we're raising the age of 19, that's another universe. But I'm also curious of how many are already being served under youthful offender status, right? And so I think we really have to be clear on the populations, the different populations that are identified in the juvenile justice system, and how do we separate them out and have appropriate caseload data so that we can make informed policy decisions. And I think I love the framing, Representative Lalonde, because I think one of the greatest benefits to Raise the Age is DCF is committed to implementing Raise the Age, and they've voiced that for years now. And so I would like to support them in the ways that they note. I also know that based on research and best practice, that youth that are served in their community by community providers are going to have better outcomes. And so if we need to allocate resources and invest in Barge to help DCF implement Raise the Age, and then also, work on the other populations that they are mandated to serve, then I would be in support of that. I think all of us.
And then let me clarify again, it is not 170 youth that are going to switch. And I think we need to know how many, right? I would be interested to know how many of these 170 are 19 or at that point in time, or whatever point in time, 19, how many are 18? How many are 17, all the way down? Because there's a population that no matter what DCF is already serving based on current law that's not on the table, right? So that would be up to 18. There's a population of 18-year-olds that they started serving when phase one of raise the age went into effect. And then there's another population of 19-year-olds that they might serve that's really probably DOC data, right? And so, you know, we need to be
Yeah, I was
looking
going
at
to say,
that.
being able to
Yeah.
assess what resources might be necessary in order to fully implement
Right.
this raise the ages. I guess that's what I'm trying to get at. So I don't, you know, I don't have, I support the policy. I'm also not interested in making a shaky situation worse. And so, you know, I couldn't in good conscience say, you know, do this without additional resources. And I think that that's important for people sitting around this table to understand, and our colleagues out there. And I don't hear you advocating for that. I just, so knowing what the real universe is important to understanding what resources might be needed in order to fully support that.
Yeah, I also wanted to zoom out and say, you know, there was a huge process again in 2019 and prior to look at all of this and to create the reasons for raise the age. And you all did your job as a legislative body. To now go back on legislation, sure, it happens. But, you know, I think that's reserved for situations in which there's a real mistake or something wasn't taken into consideration. And we've been spending a lot of time. I mean, DCF in other avenues will say, you know, if they're spending time on X, they can't spend time on Y. And I understand that. And I think to continue to ask them to create these reports and to come up here and continue to have hearings on legislation that, you know, I mean, you know, no offense, but I think we're doing a less good job now, sort of doing this ad hoc and looking about whether to delay it than the original process. And so I would encourage everybody to look back at those original reports and look at why we have this, because I think, yes, the pandemic happened, but I don't think things are fundamentally different. And what we know about brain science, you know, if anything, it's affirmed, you know, everything that's behind raise the age.
So before we go to Ginny Lyons, just to be clear, I don't think we're looking at whether to delay. I think we're trying to understand what we need, perhaps in the Budget Adjustment Act, next year's budget. What does DCF need to be in as good a position to get this going April 1st of 2025? That's our main purpose.
I appreciate that clarification. And I think, again, my answer to that is the data system, first and foremost, and don't wait, because it's going to go the wrong direction if you wait.
So I'm going to ask a follow-up question and then to Ginny, but just from what you said. So if that data system is not sufficient by April 1st of 2025, do we still proceed?
Absolutely. It will not be. It will. There's no way it will be.
Right.
I do think we can make some temporary fixes, which is a separate conversation. But that's, I think, back to the earlier question about that last phrase in the reporting bill, why it says these aren't requirements for implementation, because we don't want to be up here saying we can't implement this law until all of these things are satisfied, right?
Oh, sorry.
No, good. You actually said what I was going to say, but you know, having a system in place and then figuring out where we are in the system development is critically important. And I know you've talked about the data acquisition piece before and in another meeting. I know how important it is. If nothing else, we talk about requiring additional capacity for facilities. If nothing else, it shines a really bright light on how we are working with the younger group of folks. And it shines a light not just on those who are criminally or judicially involved, it also shines a light on others who need community services. So I'll just end there, but having the system in place is really.
Right. So we need to move on. The chair has given me limited time to get through all my witnesses today. So
Go back and forth like this all the time.
so anyway, so we're gonna thank you very much.
You're welcome. Our PowerPoint has other useful information, I think, that very,
Let's focus. Look at it. It is very, very helpful.
thanks for having us.
Go to Commissioner Winter.
For having us ahead of them, because they would have taken.
That was your first mistake.
Yeah.
And whatever else you need, Commissioner Winters.
I'm joined online by Deputy Commissioner Radke and Director of Adolescent Services, Tyler Allen.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. So I think you heard the question, the main question, I guess. Happy to hear that you would understand the benefits and why we're doing this, but really wanted, with the time we have, understand what the greatest needs are to be able to be in as good a position as we can April 1st, 2025.
Thank you, Representative Lalonde. For the record, my name is Chris Peters. I'm the Commissioner of the Department for Children and Families, and I do just want to say up front that we absolutely do share the goal of increasing the number of youths who avoid the criminal justice system and as a result can have a successful transition into adulthood. That said, we still will remain concerned, as you might imagine, with the impact that this will have on the rest of our systems, our workforce, and our ability to care for the other children who are our responsibility. Because it was such a topic from the previous testimony, I think I'd like to turn it straight over to Tyler Allen to speak a little bit about that 170 number, how we're looking at caseload and the pressures that we think we're going to see. We do have some additional information from our friends, the Department of Corrections. And Tyler, could you speak to the caseload, please?
I would be happy. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tyler Allen, for the record. I'm the Adolescent Services Director for Family Services Division. And I just wanted to clarify that 170 number was always referring to the potential number of youth or the number of youth that are they're not DCF's custody, but DCF is supervising for probation, for purposes of probation only. And this proposal involves expanding our barge budget, which is the community resource that Deputy Director Higby referenced. This is a community resource that we are proposing an expansion of that programming could offload a portion of caseload from DCF's existing caseload to free up attention for those custodial delinquents in our care. And so it is not referring to 19-year-olds or a new population that would come our way. It's referring to youth that are already in our care, whether youthful offender or as a delinquent, as what's known as a delinquent, a youth with delinquency. We do have a little data to that. We were able to pull some together from our friends at Corrections and using our own. A snapshot of the data, there are a total of over a 2-year time between fiscal year 22 and 24. There were a total of 38 delinquent and YO cases of either 18 or 19-year-olds in our care. So if we're looking at that population, there are 38 of those over a 2-year time. Those can be broken out by 18 and 19-year-olds. The vast majority of them are for what we refer to as Big 11, but what we're talking about today is Big 14. I think there's a technical understanding difference, but if I slip and say Big 11, no, I'm referring to what Eric referred to as Big 14. But all but one of those would be, actually all of those would have Big 11 offenses attached to them. 14 of them are 19-year-olds, 19 of them are 18-year-olds, either on one youthful offender, one delinquent. For the 19-year-old population of youths that are currently being served by the criminal division, this is DOC data. There are a total raised the age population of individuals convicted in criminal division is 168 over a 2-year time. Which is probably more talking about what the population we are, although some of them could, actually, no, those aren't the youthful offenders. Of those 18, there is 1 misdemeanor case and 31 felony case, which includes 20 Big 11 cases or Big 14 cases. Of 19-year-olds, there are 79 misdemeanors and 57 felonies, which include 17 Big 11 offenses. So the youthful offender conversation becomes relevant here because those are cases DCF is involved with, and we do work with and have had success working with. So it's worth noting, but there is an expansion of population we're talking about here. I'd also like to point to the report that the OCYFA referenced the implementation report. The Act 201 report was a comprehensive, well thought out report around what implementation needs are. In that report was the recommendation that there was an expansion of DCF workforce, I believe to include 6 additional FSWs specific to juvenile services and 2 supervisors, I believe, attached to it along with that recommendation. That portion of the recommendation has not been realized since implementation. So that corresponds with one of the requests to expand DCF workforce. So those are 2 approaches to address the overall context of juvenile justice to make it so that DCF has increased resources to better serve those new populations coming in.
I'd like to ask just a question about that last point, workforce recommendation. Why hasn't that been fulfilled?
I think we've been hesitant to fill that or to try to fill that because we have a number of vacancies already. You know, it'll be very difficult to fill those positions. Also, our position has been that we don't have the facilities and we don't have the data system. We don't have the other pieces to implement raise the age in the way that we would like to, the most effective way we'd like to, then it didn't make sense to hire any workforce for that.
So there hasn't been the effort at this point yet because of those rationales.
There's always an effort to recruit family service workers. Deputy Commissioner Radke can probably talk to you about the modest progress that we've made there, but we still have a high number of vacancies in that job class.
Okay. All right, thanks.
Just a quick follow-up on that, you kind of stole my thunder here. Commissioner, during testimony this past session, there was several employees of DCF who come in and you've stated that, just as you said now, that you couldn't fill positions and so forth. So in listening to Tyler's discussion on full-time employees, and there was what, 9 or 10 of them, whatever else. My understanding the funding hasn't been provided for that yet, or?
That's correct.
So why would you hire if you don't have the funding to begin with? In reference to Representative Lalonde's questioning.
It's a good question. I know there was a question from the committee last time around budget and what might be in the proposed budget. I of course can't get out in front of the governor on that. We're in the middle of building our budget. This is one of the things that we're looking at are those positions and is also that barge funding. I can't make any commitments today as to what will be in the budget, but you can see from the previous report that we did talk about, as I think Representative Wood was alluding to, I think it was 6 positions at that time. And we were also looking for about $1 million in increased barge funding to be able to support implementing raise the age. So those are the things that we're looking at right now as we build the budget.
Well, and just as a follow-up question as well from Senator Norris is whether the request for that funding was made by the administration or not, and if it was, what happened to that? Did the legislature not agree with that recommendation?
It was not requested.
We put it, the House Human Services Committee put it in our budget memo to House Appropriations.
Okay, but it didn't get through.
It was not requested by the administration and then it was not approved by the House.
Right,
So of
so,
course, we knew we were going to be extending. That's
right, yeah, no, I guess that's true. It was, did we know at the time of the budget that we were going to extend this? Or-
well, I can't tell you what you all discussed. But
We were assuming.
can I just ask a quick question?
Please, yeah, please.
So one of the things that I am a little confused about is, you know, if under this proposal, we would be transferring people to barge and that would free up actually caseload, why would you need 6 new family services workers if you're actually freeing up people by having barge supervise and support more youth? Why do you need 6 new?
I'll defer to Erica or Tyler on that one.
For the record, my name is Erica Radke, and I'm Deputy Commissioner of the Family Services Division of DCF. The reason that we would still need 6 additional workers, particularly those workers that would still be devoted to juvenile justice related youth, is because we will still have a workload of those youth that are in custody, and because of the increased demands that those youth often bring with them as part of their case, their work and case planning with them, we would need additional workers to do that kind of support and services for them. So that was the reason that we were requesting additional help. I also wanted to talk a little bit about, when we're talking about raise the age, it really is, we look at it as part of our whole system of care. And in terms of our workers, not only just do cases that would be part of raise the age, but foster care, younger children. And really, it's the instability in the system as a whole is what creates a difficulty for our workers and for our ability to get new workers. Right now, we do have, I believe it is 27, no, we have 23 vacancies right now. And that's as of last week. And then we have an additional 19 workers that have less than 6 months experience on the job, so they can't carry a full caseload. And what this means is that the reduced number of workers and the increased acuity of the youth that we're working with, and then the other issues as far as not having a secure facility, all really combine to make that much more of a workload pressure on the workers that we have. And that really does have a true impact on our considering whether or not going to the next phase of raise the age is really feasible for us. And we have been making some recruitment and retention efforts thus far. We've been thinking outside of the box, and we have had some modest success with that, that I'd be happy to go into at another time or even now, but I just wanted to make sure that we put into context when we're talking about workforce, that it's because we're working with all of the youth in our custody that the ability to serve each youth is impacted fully.
May I offer up one sub bullet to one of the points presented by the Deputy Commissioner?
Yes, please.
Hearing nothing at all. So there is an understanding amongst caseworkers of all types that 10% of your caseload accounts for 90% of your work. Those numbers change depending on the social worker you're talking to, but that seems to be generally true. And so when we're asking about an expansion of the barge budget and an increase in juvenile services workers, that's really coming to the idea that many of the folks we work with don't need the level of intervention to have a full probation caseload go through when they can be working with a community-based provider who can kind of address all those needs without really increased intervention from DCF for the majority of youths, which we would like to see expand. I think we would like to see that expand even outside of the conversation of raise the age. When we're talking about the individuals who are, as Deputy Commissioner Radke referred to as being high acuity or having high acuity needs, they generate a huge amount of the workload that our staff are facing. And when we talk about 18-year-old and 19-year-old youth, we have some additional challenges working with them in that they have legal privileges that other youth in our care do not have. And so, and it's very common for them to maybe have less secure housing, more limited support networks in other ways. Needs are not being met. So there's more intensive workload associated with some of the transition age youth in our care, who we do serve, associated with getting them through. And if they have a co-occurring legal matter that we're trying to address, it's hard to focus on the legal concerns of this individual based on the life concerns of them in that moment of time. And so this would really apply more time for our workforce to attend to those needs holistically.
Well, I'm confused. Has those 6 positions that would be needed, those have not been approved or established?
They've not been established.
Yeah. I just wanted clarity because I know the money wasn't there, but I wasn't sure if those positions had been approved.
Right. So if you can proceed for addressing the other needs, I had a couple questions as well, but I want to make sure you have your chance to touch on other issues.
Sure. I think based on what we knew of what the committee was looking for, Erica could speak to workforce. You've heard our efforts there, modest gains here in facilities. We hope that to have the Red Clover building in Middlesex open very soon. We're putting the finishing touches on that, working out some of the final details. We continue with the city of Virgins on the Green Mountain Youth Campus and having a lot of conversation with city officials and with the community there, but moving ahead apace. With, perhaps some slowdown in the schedule there due to having more stakeholder involvement and perhaps looking at some design changes. And some of that was based on the feedback we got from this committee last time in making sure that we are addressing potential 18 and 19-year-olds in that building as well, and whether there could possibly be a separate space looking at the overall milieu of the youth who would receive treatment there. It could be anywhere from 12 to 19 years old, and how that's difficult and complicated to mix that group together. And of course, Eric, Deputy Commissioner, or the Director Allen could speak to that. And I think it's just lastly, I think it's important for us to note and to point out some of the things that are working really well with 18-year-olds and raise the age, and some of the challenges. Director Allen pointed to that a little bit in terms of their supports, their stability, and their ability to tell us no and not engage in services. And I think we should also be taking a look at the youthful offender program and the successes that we may be having there and the slight differences between that and raise the age. And I just wondered if we could just take a minute to have Erica kind of speak to the youthful offender program, some of the challenges that we're seeing with 18-year-olds, and some of the successes that we're seeing with 19-year-olds under YO status.
Great, thank you.
Sure. In terms of the successes, we've been able to work with youthful offenders and be able to place them in a return house. And we've really had some success with being able to get those transition age youth onto successful adulthood with some supports and services, just to get them to the place where they're able to make those adulthood decisions. And really, it's been it's that intensive type of service that has been helpful when you get a youth that's able and really willing to accept that kind of help. But on the reverse end, when we're talking about the 19-year-olds, particularly those that may be youthful offender, or even those that would be raise the age if we at that particular instance, because they're in our custody, but not so that they can refuse treatment. They don't need to stay in a program if they don't want to, because they are legally, they're of age. So then it's not as effective because they aren't bound to stay within a program the way they would if they were a younger youth. And that does make it more difficult for us to have that kind of service success with them. So it's something that we are still really working with in order to provide them with the service that is helpful, that they will accept. So that's some of the challenge there as well.
Questions from other folks? So before we move on, just really quickly, and we'll have a couple more witnesses, and give me a little bit more time.
No, that's fine.
So we see this raise the age as not only having good outcomes for the emerging adults, and that's why really pushing to have this happen, but also that it's going to help with public safety because we get better results. The frustration and why I think you have the April 1st deadline is that we feel that they're not placing the blame with the DCF folks that we have in front of us right now, but there hasn't been requests for the resources to, we've known for years that the IT system needs to be upgraded for years. And there's been opportunities in the past to do that with significant federal funds, and it hasn't happened. We've known for quite a while of the workforce issues. We've known for quite a while about the residency, having a placement for these folks. And it's a great frustration that there seems to be foot dragging and them not placing that at the commissioners or deputy commissioners level. And that's what's really frustrating. But we really want to stick with the April 1st and do what we need to do. Whatever the administration may be asking for in the Budget Adjustment Act, the next budget. We can look at the 2021 recommendations and we can push ourselves, say that we need more money in barge, we need more money for these additional positions, we need to have appropriate resources to get this IT system up to speed as well. So, yeah, the one other thing I just want to throw out there, and don't have to comment on this right now, but one of our big initiatives in the Judiciary Committees this year was H645. I don't remember what act number that is, of expanding pre-charge diversion. And as that rolls out, we're hoping that more 19-year-olds, 18-year-olds, or actually all ages will not be getting into DCF, will be going through pre-charge diversion or barge. And we'll see how that plays out. That's a little bit near term as well. But any other parting comments, and we'll move to a couple.
Can I just ask one thing?
Yeah, please.
It's not really a question. It's like, I appreciate the attempt to provide data in terms of the number, but we really are going to need a very much more concise breakout of the number of individuals that you would anticipate being impacted and how that will relate to either your request for resources or what the legislature may deem necessary. So, the information that was forwarded here and, we need the category that really breaks out 19-year-olds and 19-year-olds that are in addition to what it is that you are already doing. So I just want to be clear about data that we will need.
Absolutely. The data drivers are key to our ability to implement effectively. And I think you'll continue to hear us say we're very, very concerned about the stress on our workforce and our systems and our ability to do our jobs if we add additional caseload. So we'll get you some clarity on what that caseload looks like, not only the numbers, but the complexity, I think, as Director Allen referred to, what is the actual work involved with these individuals.
And I think as we heard with Department of Corrections earlier this morning, I think it will be helpful. And Erica didn't have a chance to talk about the methods that DCF is using to try to recruit and retain people. So it's hard for us to make decisions about adding staff when you're nowhere near close to being at a staffing capacity that would be considered normal. Your vacancy rate's still very high. So,
we'll follow up with that.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Great. Thank you very much, Commissioner. So we'll go to Judge Zoning, and then after that, we'll go to Tim Peters-Dumont. So Judge Zoning, thank you for being here.
Well, thank you. Good afternoon. I know you're short on time, but Tom Zoning, Chief Superior Judge, do you have any questions? From what I've heard so far, and as we know, this is a decision on raise the ages policy. I actually have reviewed the report that DCF was supposed to file, and I would note that they were the commissioner, the deputy commissioner contacted me and others from their agency and invited the judiciary to come and look at Red Clover. And so we had a visit there. They provided me with information, and I shared it with the judges last night. And so we really appreciate their openness and willingness to allow that. And in fact, they also said that when we train new judges, one of the components of our training will be having the new judges actually go to see the facility. And so we appreciate them moving forward in that direction. But the policy decisions are ones for the legislature as to raise the age, pause, and how you're going to go forward.
So I guess the question always is what impact to the court, if any, of the.
We're going to hear the case, whether it's in family or the criminal division. And I'm sure that we could try to come up with a case to say, well, if it's here, it might require more. But I think overall, we will address the cases in whichever division the legislature takes us to. And we'll do it as best we can.
So we've heard in the past that, for example, having folks with mental health problems or other chronic illnesses, that when the court provides placement or services, sometimes those services are not available. And so community services then place pressure on the courts and offer some concerns. So I'm wondering if there is any similar concern with raise the age. So how to work with this younger population
Is there a linkage between what you're doing and what community services are available or not available?
Much of the difficulty we find comes from the pre-adjudication stage. And that is when someone comes in for conditions of release, we don't have sometimes the community resources to be able to refer them to. And we'd like to get them the help they need, but we might not have somewhere to send them. Whether it's in the adult court or the juvenile court, the question really is there a strategy to get them the services they need through available services? And so if DCF is going to be working with individuals, they can help them. If DOC is going to be working with individuals, they can help them. The courts are not a place where we have generally the ability to say, okay, you're going to go here for services. Conditions of release we can try, but as you know, we have difficulty.
Right, but you see the backup and you see the backlog. I mean, it's similar with competency evaluation. We see where do we place this person in the interim? So maybe it's not time to have to see that yet. We've raised the age. Are you?
I think it would be difficult to try to get the crystal ball out and say what's it going to do, and that's why I think we have to approach it from the perspective of we currently deal with these cases in one of two places, and we do the best we can with the available resources. And whatever of the two divisions it will be in, we're going to continue to do that. And if we think that there's additional resources that are necessary, we'll talk to our stakeholders and the other justice partners and support them in trying to get the resources to effectuate what our common goal is. Any other questions? Not seeing any. Thank you very much. Good to see you. And I just would note that Terry Corsones was on your list, but I didn't want you to think that she just blew you off today. There will be a new addition to the Corsones family, so she is. Oh, good.
Oh, wow.
She is with a family member today, and I keep checking my phone to see, but no announcement yet, but hold it against you that you didn't bring any cookies. I was trying to get over there this morning, but I will tell her whether there's a new grandchild or not, they needed cookies. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Right. So thank you, Tim, for being here, and over to you.
Good to see you. I'm going to try to be as quick as possible. Tim Leaders, Dumont, Department of State's Attorneys and Sheriffs. I have to take over some child care sharply at 2:45. So thanks for getting me in early. Yeah, so when the committee assistant reached out and talked to me about looking for perspective from our department about this issue, I contacted our SAS, Department of State's Attorneys and Sheriffs, youth and juvenile practitioners that are in the courtrooms, the family courtrooms every day. As a bit of context, our department is experiencing caseloads of 350 to 360 cases per attorney. And often our juvenile and youth practitioners are carrying a criminal caseload as well. So they're co-managing really three dockets: the civil docket for PCRs, the family docket, and also the criminal docket. And occasionally we do find ourselves in probate court, but I'm not going to get into that. But technically that's a part of what we do as well occasionally. One thing that you'll hear in terms of some of what I'm going to say today, and I'm going to submit in writing after today, some of the response I heard from the field is, I would say you will detect, having heard testimony from DCF Frontlines, a similarity between DCF Frontline and law enforcement concerns and the SAS practitioner frontline. This is in part due to our department's rather unique status in the Montpelier sphere as being decentralized as to its decision-making and policy and leadership structure. So my superiors, so to speak, are in 14 counties doing the work every day. And we really support that field. And so I try to best represent what they're experiencing from the field. And so the responses were collected to provide really direct response. They don't necessarily represent the views of the department or even individual state's attorneys, but we think that there's value in the committee's review of the topic and sort of hearing those things. I have removed names and county identifiers to maintain the confidentiality of Vermont's family court system while still providing an opportunity for you to, I would say, look under the hood of this area of practice. So one point of clarity that I always do is with respect to the big offenses. We call it a big 14 now. 11 are really the original Big 12 -1, and 3 of them are now 16 and up only. Those 3 that Attorney Fitzpatrick spoke to you about. So those are 16 and up only, and then the original 11 are that younger age group up until the overlapping 16 and up population. But it's really a big 3 and a big 11 that have some overlap. The Big 14 does not command nor mandate that our prosecutors keep those cases in the criminal division or even file them in the criminal division. We can directly file them into the family division. And so when you look at, as of March 1st, the 442 youthful offender cases that were pending, some subset of that youthful offender population are going to be big offenses. I haven't looked under the hood of those 442 as of March 1, but some of those are going to be big offenses that were direct filed or that were later moved by stipulation or by other court process into YO status. So I just wanted, we could talk a lot about that, but I'm not going to dwell on that. I want to get right into the practitioner responses, and I'm just going to identify these as response number 1, response number 2, without other identifiers, if that's okay to proceed that way. Representative Lalonde.
That's fine, yeah, please.
So response number 1, I support the goals of raise the age, but at this point, 30% of my delinquency cases that come in are for those 18 and up. 30% is not a ballpark. I ran the numbers, and this is for one of our larger counties. As of the cases submitted between July 1st, 2023 and June 30th, 2024, exactly 30% were 18 up. That population will continue to expand in terms of the percentage of the cases that are 18 plus that are in delinquency status or that are in delinquency definition will continue to expand. So 30% for a fairly large county will continue to go up. And this just illustrates the work that has occurred in terms of the first phase that Attorney Fitzpatrick spoke about and where it may expand going forward. And response number 2, again, sort of with that disclaimer at the beginning that these are direct responses at no fault of frontline DCF staff, but I have observed that DCF has not changed anything in their system, at least as far as I can tell, to account for the fact that they no longer just work with kids. The biggest problem I see is that DCF has not fully adapted or was not provided the resources to adapt. This is not to blame caseworkers, since this is clearly a management or Montpelier issue. But I feel that most FSWs do not want to be working with the 18 plus population. Instead, they push to close out cases and raise concerns. The last point from response number 2, having facilities and programs is wonderful. But at this point, I would settle for youth and juvenile probation officers who are willing and supported to do the appropriate level of support for the 18 plus population. Response number 3, rather than juvenile court, in many of the counties, the judges do a cite out, meaning you can cite out a case and you can determine that cite out time period, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 4 weeks, sort of depends on the county. But in one particular county, at least where this response came in, they have a limited amount of slots, about 12 slots each month for juvenile delinquency spaces. So if a case came in today, let's say that the April 1 deadline was today and the case came in today, the first opportunity to fill one of those spots for someone up to age 20, 19 plus, would be late November. So this will potentially add, the expansion of it may add to concerns related to tying the point of offense or concern with the first opportunity in court, which we know is important. Just wanted to add a little bit of nuance to that comment because it sort of depends on the county, but that was a fairly large county. Another response that came in was concern about law enforcement training. I'm concerned about law enforcement training, implementing this new update as of April 1 of next year. I will need to go around to the various law enforcement agencies and do another juvenile training with this new update. We are not currently staffed to provide this level of training, as such trainings often fall during the work week, et cetera. Just a commentary on that. Our department does not have a training coordinator. We do not have substantial amounts of training resources. So often what happens is the training kind of happens live in the field. I think that illustrates that point. Another response that came in, one of the questions that we got was what's the thought process for when a case goes to family or criminal court, if it fits into that overlapping category. And so this response was, from my perspective, it depends on the age of the juvenile, the type of crime, the facts and circumstances. And there are times where we can choose, as I was talking about earlier, depending on the charge, to send it either to criminal court for a big offense, directly to family court as a YO, or to juvenile court as a delinquency. An immediate example that comes to mind is a juvenile who is 16 and commits an aggravated assault or a fact pattern that fits the aggravated assault fact pattern. Let's say it's in the domestic context. We could do A, charge as a big offense as an aggravated assault and send the case to the criminal division, or to the family division as a YO, or we could charge as first degree ag domestic in juvenile court. It's because domestics are not a part of the big offense list. In these cases where there are decisions of where and when to send, it typically depends on the facts. I won't belabor that, but it would depend on the history of the individual. And so that's an important factor that everyone has emphasized. Another important response. Oh, yes. I didn't know if you had a question. I'm sorry. I'm going to
keep going.
Yep, I'm trying to burn through these, and I will send these in writing as well, so you'll have them on the record. Supports in the community. This goes to, I think, Representative Wood's comment and Senator Lyons. I know at least here in County X, when trying to rehabilitate or assist with rehabilitation of a juvenile or juvenile connected, we try to get juveniles connected with resources as soon as possible. County X mental health, barge, etc. My understanding now is that even without raise the age phase 2, our community resources are stretched thin with long waiting lists, even to get the initial screening. I wonder if anything has been done to ensure community supports are expanded and have enough resources to sustain a further expansion. Response number, next response. The simple version is that they have not, and I'm using they, just direct quote, they have not done the legislative work to make this a reality with success. They have neither the physical nor legal infrastructure to deal with this population and have not appropriated the resources necessary to achieve the stated goals. I would have no problem if this were another option for charging and disposition. As structured, raise the age creates barriers and delays for circumstances which do not comfortably fit in family court in all circumstances to account for safety and severity. Another point that you'll hear is depending on the county and the judge, there are some counties where even for a big offense, and this is one way where raise the age potentially impacts even the big offenses, there is a federal law that notes an 180-day detention limit. And some judges have interpreted that to apply to those that we're charging as adults and big offenses. Other judges have taken a different approach. And so it's a little bit dependent on the county and the judge. Response number 5. So that would mean even for a murder, for a big offense, it's possible that in some counties, the individual cannot be held. Let's say after April 1, a 19-year-old cannot be held for more than 6 months, even if they were being held without bail under Constitution and Title 13. Next response, I do not think we're ready for raise the age. It requires the right amount of resources to be able to serve this age group. DCF needs access to a secure facility to place juveniles. It's not a lot of cases, but when the cases arise, it's important because something has happened and there's a public safety risk, at least in terms of the reasons that we would potentially have some overlap with that. And the rest of these, I'll probably just send to you. The final one I wanted to mention, because it has to do with a little bit of data that one of the counties got back to me with, has to do with aging out, which is when you age out of the juvenile system, and some of the obstacles that we run into in terms of what happens there. So this is a response to me in the central office, but Tim, as you know, I keep track of my cases and report statistics. In 2020, when raise the age occurred, halfway into the year, to 18-year-olds, 0 cases aged out of jurisdiction without case resolution. In 2021, 2 cases aged out of jurisdiction without resolution. In 2022, 4 cases aged out without case resolution, 1 with a pending arrest warrant. In 2023, 8 cases aged out without jurisdiction, 1 with a pending arrest warrant. I have not done the analysis yet for 2024. It will only get worse when we add 19-year-old individuals to the delinquency roster.
Before you go on, Tim.
Yep.
Explain what aged out means.
So dependent
What
on,
happens?
So dependent on whether they're under the delinquency status or a youthful offender, there is a maximum age upon which jurisdiction applies. So one of the two is six months past 21, I believe, and there might be someone in the room that can correct me. And the other one is, I don't live and breathe this every day, which is why I'm providing you some of this. And the other one is 6 months past maybe 22, or maybe 1 year after 21. I can't remember the exact, but basically they reach a certain age and then the family court no longer has jurisdiction. And so what often ends up happening is the cases essentially get dismissed. And without having that accountability factor. And we're dealing with a population where in many other contexts, they're legal adults. But here, so there isn't a parent for like a 14-year-old, right, who's bringing them there or guardian. For the 18, 19, they might be living in an apartment by themselves. They might be without a house. They might be, having other levels of issues in the community. So sometimes, and sometimes it's at no fault of the young person, and sometimes it is purposeful. They're aging out, and we're not able to really assist in that rehabilitative process under Title 33. And we have so many other cases, happening in our court system. These things are not being addressed by the time they are no longer under the jurisdiction of the family division.
Thank you.
Yep. And I'm getting towards the end here, I promise. One of the reasons that the legislature gives for the purpose of raise the age historically has been to protect young people in the raise the age category from the consequences of a criminal record. And we've discussed that this morning. But this is already accomplished in some respects under the expungement provisions under Title 33 DSA 5, Section 5119, which allows for expungement of any crime except listed offenses that are committed prior to age 25. And so there is other provisions that allow for some of the same goals, and that actually extends up to age 25 in that context. And the other piece here that I think it's important to note is that we deal with the victims of crime in our department. And so this is a complex and difficult area to work with victims because of the confidentiality that exists in family court. And so from the perspective that we've heard from some of our victim advocates, it's some of our more difficult cases because we're not able to, because it's confidential, the victim advocates are slightly more limited, right? And what they can talk about outside the courtroom to a great degree to protect the rehabilitative pathway that Title 33 allows. But when it's a serious felony, that's a non-big offense, it can be something quite serious, like a domestic, between people living together who are 18 years old. So that can be very complex, and I don't need to probably belabor that for you to imagine your own scenarios where that could be really difficult to work with a victim about why the case is in the family division. And when we try to transfer those up, which we're allowed to attempt to try to do, a non-big offense from family to criminal, it can take a long time. We've heard some of these take over a year. So during that time period, the individual is not subject to criminal conditions of release and is not subject to things like bail if they're not showing up for court. And so that kind of abuts and runs up against the age out piece, because that is also a clock ticking against when we're able to engage in the family division. I hope that some of this was helpful. And the last piece that I'll end with, because it came up earlier, was about recidivism in Vermont. In terms of recidivism in statute, it's only applying to individuals who are sentenced to more than 1 year of incarceration. Do not have to tell anybody that's working in this realm that many, many, many sentences are not for over a year or not for a year. So recidivism only applies to a population in terms of the adult population that is incarcerated for over 1 year and then after release returns to prison within 3 years. So if you committed 10 retail thefts, were sentenced to a total of 10 days, and you did that 10 times throughout the year, you would not be recidivist in our definition under Vermont statute. That's really the conclusion of my remarks. I hopefully was quick.
You were quick, and I could probably spend 2 days piecing through what you've talked to us, and probably will in January. Any questions, any other questions for Tim? Besides the dozen or so I have, but won't ask at this point.
I'll submit this once I get it cleaned up. I was getting responses 5 minutes before I started talking. I'll submit everything to the committee assistant at the conclusion.
All right, thanks a lot, Tim. All right, so I don't believe we have Marshall here, but so Isaac and Joshua, do you want a chance to weigh in? And
Great, we're just gonna share the data.
if that works. But
So I think, yeah, that maybe it's a matter of whether we have particular questions. This is the data that you shared. So rather than go over what we've probably looked at, maybe, yeah, why don't you join us and if we have any questions? And I think the main question that jumps out at me is I can't really tell what this means regarding 19-year-olds.
I noticed that, and I think the more folks, sorry, for the record, Dr. Rutherford, Facility Operations Manager with the Department of Corrections. I noticed that, and I think the more that we went through testimony today, the more apparent it became that we need to break that down a little narrower for I did do a point in time this morning on 19-year-olds specifically. That is not totally unique individuals in the calendar year. How many we have in custody right now? As of this morning, there are 7 19-year-olds who are incarcerated in the state of Vermont for Vermont charges. If raise the age was in effect, the next phase was in effect today, 4 of those would still be with us and 3 of them would not.
So go ahead.
Well, those 4 that would still be with you, would that have to be sight and sound?
So that is a complication with raise the age, and yes and no. So anybody under 18, regardless of raise the age, is going to have to be sight and sound separating their unit under PREA guidelines. They can have contact outside of their unit while supervised with adults, but they have to be sight and sound separating their unit. That is a challenge because we very often have 1 or 2 of those folks and they are pretty isolated. For individuals who are over 18 and are not at the age of full criminal responsibility, which in Vermont right now is 19, and your proposer in April will become 20, they have to be sight and sound separated until they have an interest of justice hearing. At the interest of justice hearing, the court can determine whether or not to allow them to have contact with adults. Thus far, every 18-year-old that we have had, the court has chosen to allow them to have contact with adults because the alternative is generally a pretty significant degree of segregation or separation. I have 4 18-year-olds right now as of this morning in custody. And so if 1 or 2 of those were in sight and sound separation, it'd be 1 or 2. And they'd be away from it. And there's just more opportunity to access services and access them in a more normal environment if they're living in general population. We have to do some things to be careful about, obviously, potentially vulnerabilities, making sure they're safe, but they just have a more normalized experience and a lot more ability to socialize with peer and engage in services in a normal environment if they're in population.
Other questions? Go ahead, Tom.
I have a question. It's kind of an overall question dealing with the people that are involved in this raise the age. And it's probably a question for the commissioner. How many of these individuals are developmentally disabled?
I don't know the answer to that, Representative.
Because it's going to take a different kind of service, providing different kinds of services.
It's required in their report. It's a required element of the report.
Is it in the last report?
I cannot recall, to be perfectly honest, but
So I should.
we should check the report. If it's not there, then we have.
Thanks for enlightening me. So I just have a general question and goes beyond, but it's whenever we get data from DOC, it's this point in time. Where are you going with data so that you could perhaps tell me how many 19-year-olds have been incarcerated for how much time over a period of time? Is that anywhere in the future for the system that I understand is being updated?
Our data team is continually increasing what they can do, but I'm not the best one to speak to that. Point in time is one of the easiest things for us to grab. Some of the other inquiries we can get, they were able to give us the total number of unique individuals in a calendar year.
Right.
Which obviously isn't a point in time.
Right.
But it is a challenge to measure groups versus a lot of our data is very individualized.
Okay, all right, thank you. I just thought I'd ask you.
One thing I did want to just point out to these numbers, because it's such an aberration, is the racial demographics of this younger age group. In both calendar year 22 and 23, approximately 50% of the individuals who are 21 or under in our custody were white. For our total incarcerated population, that percentage is more like 88 or 89%. So you have significantly more people of color involved when we start talking with this younger age group. And I'm not sure as the reason for that, but it leaps out to us from the data. And I think anytime we start talking about discrepancies, identifying that they're there is the first step to figuring out why and what we do about that.
Right, I think that's all the witnesses we have because Martha was not able to make it, but really appreciate your time. Thank you.
I appreciate all the folks who spoke longer than I did.
Sorry for letting us dig in there a little bit.
No, it's your bailiwick, not mine.
And Bob.
And Bob's. And Nodder. Okay, we've got one more item, folks. and Hopefully we can get through this a little quickly. I'm not sure. I know this room is warm, and I know one of the reasons why the State House is so warm is there's work being done on the HVAC. And I don't know if it would help to open up the door at all. I get some air. Yes, it's because they're working on the HVAC. It's warm outside. So we've got, at our next meeting, we really need to make a decision on how we apply earn time in DOC to, keep the door open. Be it expanded to different statuses of, when we close it, it's gonna be too trouble. And, whether we have requirements for people. If we do.
Security alert. Hostile intruder is in the building. Law enforcement is responding to this event. Remain in a safe location and wait for further instructions.
Should we lock our door?
Yes, lock the door. Yeah, we're supposed to close the windows too.
Yeah, close the windows. Well, we have DOC. Okay,
Well, there we go.
now unlock the door. A hostile intruder. We were in finance one year.
Security alert. Hostile intruder is in the building. Law enforcement is responding to this event. Remain in a safe location and wait for further instructions.
You lock the door again.
I unlocked it, but now we can relock it.
And then there will be a false alarm. We hope.
Yeah.
Maybe you should put.
Let's do it.
I'll look to your lawyer. Let's-
Let's.
That was Jay.
Yeah, it was Jay.
That was Jay Hooper. You're pointing at this Jay Hooper walking by.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, there's.
Okay, no false
There
alarms.
should be a security alert whenever Jay.
We should be having a person, on our phones.
Oh, I'm sorry, we.
Yeah, there isn't a security alert on my phone. Is there anything on your phone?
No, I don't think so.
Vermont Alert would do this, right?
Should.
T
The alert should be sort of.
Theoretically,
Theoretically.
they are on that system.
Oh, we went out.
Or lock the sign.
I don't know, maybe Megan.
I haven't heard anything.
Well, let's keep going. So for earned time, we already have a structure in place, and I think for the committee, you need to understand the current structure that's in place and how it works in DOC before we can make any recommendations next month that we're gonna have to make. Because by the middle of November, we will had to have a recommendation given. So I'd like to make the recommendation at our next meeting if possible. So I'm turning it over to Ben. He's got lots of documents. And it's all yours, Ben.
Really good way to scare people off. in
What?
Introduction. This is Ben, he has lots of documents.
documents. Yes. But some of that was medical stuff. So
Right,
You're not gonna need all the medical.
So for the record, Ben Novogrodsky from the Office of Legislative Counsel, and don't be scared off by my documents. The only one that really, if you want, as a quick reference, is sort of my memo that I wrote to committee. And then the other ones about the earned good time rule, that's from DOC, the facility rules, and inmate discipline, and then the statute are just for context, if you don't want to go back to the sources themselves. So it's not that scary.
So don't get it confused because there's also the medical piece we're gonna deal with in our October meeting. So you got two documents that are the medical piece, but you don't need to look at.
We
till-
saved it.
You save those till next meeting, but you got three documents for earned time.
Right, so to get into earn time generally, I mean, it's really this concept that if a offender is well behaved, they can have 7 days per month of good behavior subtracted from their minimum or maximum sentences, and maximum sentences, excuse me. And what that involves is, one, they cannot be adjudicated of a major disciplinary rule violation during that time and not reincarcerated from the community for a violation of their release conditions. And this makes an exception for someone that loses housing sort of at no fault of their own. And that may have been a condition of release. So they're safe if that were to occur. But those are the two main requirements for someone to be to earn good time. And a major disciplinary rule violation, according to DOC's directives, there are two categories, major A and major B. Major A is sort of the ultimate things that constitute violent acts or serious threats to institutional security or personal safety. And major B are basically serious instances of misconduct that don't rise to that level of major A. And I should say that a major disciplinary rule violation, so it has to be adjudicated, meaning it's not currently pending and not subject to appeal. So it has to be a final ruling. So those who are pending adjudication don't meet the criteria for it. So are there any questions about the general criteria for earned good time? Now, who's not eligible for good time? Offenders who are on probation, offenders on parole, offenders who are sentenced to serve an interrupted sentence, so one that is not served continuously in intervals, or those that are sentenced to work crew, which is now back as a sentencing option after last session, offenders sentenced to life without parole, and offenders serving a disqualifying offense, which is defined in the statute as murder, voluntary manslaughter, kidnapping, lewd and lascivious conduct with a child, sexual assault, aggravated sexual assault, and aggravated sexual assault of a child. So those are offenses that disqualify people, even if they meet the criteria from being eligible for good time. So any questions on the ineligible folks?
Folks know the difference between furlough and parole.
Getting to that too.
Do folks know the difference?
I just want to make sure that when you understand the disqualifying offenses are only if one was serving on them on January 1st of 2021.
Right.
So if somebody was sentenced today, there are no disqualifying offenses. It's only for those who are already serving.
Right.
Okay.
So, and that's
There's a long
important.
history there.
That's an important distinction.
Yeah, because there are certain retroactivity principles that we have to be mindful of when we're drafting legislation. And so it was only forward looking that it would apply to and not those that in the past. So thank you, Josh. There is an exception for residential treatment. So an offender in a post-adjudication residential setting for substance use treatment is eligible to earn a reduction of 1 day off their sentence for each day they receive their inpatient treatment. And that's the only type of earned time that particular type of offender can earn. And then there are notifications and record keeping requirements. So a lot of this falls on DOC, that they provide notification to victims of records about the existence of the program itself, as long as informing them of the option to receive notification from the department for any changes to an offender's scheduled release. So basically, if they are earning good time, every time their sentence is lowered, if the person has opted in to receive those services.
Hide and fight action plan and seek refuge in a safe location.
Yeah, you log in.
Let's close the door.
Yeah.
I mean,
Security alert, security alert. Immediately initiate your run, hop. Security alert, security alert. Immediately
I move to adjourn.
hide and fight action plan and seek refuge in a safe location. Security alert, security alert. Immediately initiate your run, hide and fight.
the lights out.
Security alert, security alert. Immediately initiate your run,
Oh,
hide and
right.
fight action plan and